Hello, friends. I'm glad to present a new author's story, which I voiced especially for you. Enjoy listening.
My name is Sandra Wesley. I'm 23 years old, and I'm the only person at Dataflow Systems who understands how an integration system works for a $113 million contract with the Department of Defense. Most of my colleagues think I'm just a young IT girl who's good with databases, but I've actually built an architecture that synchronizes 17 different federal security systems. Every password, every dependency, every security protocol goes through modules that I created and customized myself. So when the red light on server number 7 started flashing on Friday night, I knew my weekend was off again. By the way, if you've watched up to this point and haven't subscribed yet, let's fix that misunderstanding right now. Hit that red subscribe button, it doesn't bite. And be sure to post in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is on your watch. I'm always interested to know who's listening to these stories and when. Maybe someone is watching on their lunch break in Montana and someone can't sleep in Los Angeles. Share, it helps the channel grow and it helps me to understand the audience. So, back to that Friday at Dataflow Systems. I was sitting on the 30th floor of a glass skyscraper in downtown Austin, and outside the window, the Texas sunset was already beginning to unfold, painting the city orange and pink. The office was that special Friday night quiet when most of the staff had gone home and only the most stubborn or the most critical were left. I was in the second category. 3 monitors glowed in front of me, each showing a different aspect of the integration system I'd been working on for the past 8 months. This wasn't just some internal company project. It was the architecture for a $113 million federal contract with the Department of Defense. The system had to synchronize data between 17 different Pentagon databases, each with its own security protocols, data formats, and access levels. The red light on server number 7 meant that one of the critical integration modules had tripped over some protocol incompatibility again. I reached for another cup of coffee, my 6th for the day, and delved into the system logs. The problem was that the Navy database was using an outdated timestamp format that conflicted with the Army's new cybersecurity standards. This was a typical situation for government contracts. Each agency had been developing its own systems for years without much concern for compatibility with the others. That's why Dataflow Systems was awarded this contract. Our company specialized in building bridges between incompatible systems, and I was the person who designed and built those bridges. "Sandra, you're here again?" A familiar voice sounded behind me. I turned around and saw Mike Torres, our systems administrator. He was about 35 and had a rare gift for explaining complex technical things in simple terms. Mike was one of the few people in the office who really understood the scope and complexity of my job. "Hey, Mike, what are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the screen. "I forgot my laptop charger. I saw the light in your office and decided to check if something serious had happened to the system." He came closer and looked at my monitors. "Synchronization problems again?" "Yeah, the Navy databases are being cranky. Their timestamp system is stuck somewhere in the 2000 years. I pointed to the screen where integration errors were highlighted in red. Mike whistled, looking at the number of errors. "How long will it take you to fix it?" "With any luck, 3 or 4 hours. We need to write an additional conversion module that will translate their formats into our standards." "Sandra," Mike shook his head, "do you realize that without you, this system will fall apart in a week? 2 at the most?" It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that. Mike often joked about my indispensability, but he was always serious. "Don't be so dramatic," I replied, though deep down I knew he wasn't far from the truth. "The system is documented and any competent specialist can figure it out." "Theoretically, yes," Mike agreed. "Practically, I don't think so. You know how many nuances and crutches you have to use when working with government systems. Documentation can't cover everything." He was right. During the 8 months I worked on the project, I created not just an integration system, but a real maze of modules, each of which took into account the specifics of a particular agency. Some decisions had to be made on the fly, based on peculiarities that were not described in any documentation. Lisa Chen, an analyst in the quality department, joined our conversation. She was about my age, but had been with the company for 4 years. "Sandra, I saw your car in the parking lot and thought I'd stop by," she said. "Working overtime again?" "The system needs attention," I shrugged. "Look," Lisa sat on the edge of my desk. "I realize this contract is important to the company, but you don't have to kill yourself with work. Do you have a life outside of the office? To be honest, for the past few months, my life has really revolved around this project. The federal contract was the largest in Dataflow Systems history, and the future of the company depended on its successful completion." Robert Covington, our CEO, had repeatedly emphasized the importance of this project in town hall meetings. "It's temporary," I said. "In a couple more weeks, the system would be fully operational." "You know," Mike chuckled, "I sometimes think you're the only one in this company who really understands what we're doing. The rest of us just say pretty words at presentations." "Don't be so cynical," Lisa objected. "There are a lot of talented people in the company." "Talented, yes," Mike agreed, "but capable of understanding what Sandra has built?" "I doubt it." We talked some more about the technical details of the project, and then Mike and Lisa left, wishing me luck with fixing the mistakes. I plunged back into my work. I spent the next 4 hours building the conversion module for the fleet systems. It was painstaking work. I had to take into account every possible data format their legacy system could produce and convert it correctly to modern standards. By 11 p.m., the red light finally stopped flashing, and the monitors turned green with indicators of successful synchronization. The system was working steadily again. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my tired eyes. Outside the window, Austin glittered with the lights of nightlife, but I wasn't particularly attracted to it. I had to do a full system test tomorrow morning and prepare a report for Monday. As I packed, I thought about Mike's words. Was I really that critical to the project? On the one hand, it flattered my ego. On the other, it caused a certain amount of anxiety. What would happen if something happened to me? What would happen if I decided to quit? I wasn't going to quit, though. Dataflow Systems was a great company, the project was interesting, and the federal contract offered prospects for further growth for both the company and my career. As I left the office, I had no idea that in a few days there would be someone in the company who would jeopardize all of that. Monday began with all employees being rushed to the main conference room on the 31st floor for an important announcement. Such meetings were rare at Dataflow Systems, usually only when the company was awarded a major contract or when there was a major change in leadership. The last time we all got together was 8 months ago, when Robert Covington was announcing the award of a federal contract with the Department of Defense. I was one of the last ones to enter the conference room because I had been finishing up a weekend incident report on the integration system until the wee hours of the morning. Most of my colleagues had already settled into their seats, and there was that special tension in the air that always comes before important corporate announcements. Robert Covington was standing at the big screen at the front of the room, and even from a distance it was obvious that he was in high spirits. He was 55 years old, and in the 20 years of Dataflow Systems' existence, he had grown a small technical consulting firm into one of the leading enterprise systems integration companies in Texas. Robert was a man of results. He had little interest in office politics or corporate intrigue. The most important thing to him was quality project delivery and company growth. Standing next to him was an unfamiliar man in an expensive dark blue suit. He looked about 30 to 35 years old, tall, trim, with neatly styled dark hair, and that self-assured smile that usually appears in people who are used to getting everything they want without much effort. "Good morning, team," Robert began when everyone was seated. "I have some great news today. As you know, Dataflow Systems is going through a period of strong growth. The federal contract with the Department of Defense is just the beginning. We have several other major projects on the horizon, and we need fresh blood in the management team to make them a success." He turned to the stranger and put a hand on his shoulder. "Let me introduce you to Trent Covington, our new Vice President of Development and Innovation." A low whisper rustled through the room. The last name was eloquent. Apparently, the new VP was related to our CEO. "Trent just graduated from Stanford Business School," Robert continued, and has worked at several of Silicon Valley's leading technology companies. He will bring us a fresh perspective on how today's technology companies should evolve and modernize. Trent took a step forward, and his smile grew even wider. "Thank you, Robert," he said, and you could hear the habit of command in his voice. "I'm very excited to join the Data Flow Systems team. I've been scrutinizing the company over the past few weeks, and I must say I'm impressed with what you've accomplished. But I also see tremendous potential for growth and optimization." He paused, looking around the room. "The technology industry is changing at an incredible rate. What worked 5 or even 2 years ago may be obsolete today. My job is to make sure that Data Flow Systems is not just keeping up with the times, but staying ahead of the competition." I noticed a few senior developers glancing over their heads. There was a hint in Trent's words that the company's current approaches needed a major overhaul. "I have experience with agile methodologies, modern DevOps practices, and new approaches to project management," Trent continued. "I plan to conduct a detailed audit of all current processes and suggest specific improvements." Mike, who was sitting 2 rows ahead of me, turned and cast an eloquent glance at me. We both understood that beautiful words about modernization often mask painful reorganizations. "I know that change always causes some anxiety." Trent seemed to read our thoughts. "But I want to assure everyone that my goal is not destruction, but development. I want to help each of you to unlock your potential and work more efficiently." After the official part of the meeting, informal communication began. Employees approached Trent, introduced themselves, asked questions. I decided not to hurry with introductions. I prefer to observe a person before making an opinion about him. I didn't like what I saw. When David Morrison, one of our lead developers with 20 years of experience, approached Trent and began to talk about the specifics of working with legacy government systems, Trent listened with visible impatience. His gaze wandered around the room, and he had an expression on his face that clearly said, "When is this old man going to shut up?" "I understand, David," Trent finally interrupted him, "but don't you think the focus on legacy systems is limiting what we can do? Today's technology allows us to solve these problems much more elegantly." David tried to explain that when working with government contracts, it is not always possible to use the most modern solutions because of security and compatibility requirements. But Trent had already lost interest in the conversation and switched to someone else. The same pattern repeated itself several more times. Trent was clearly categorizing the employees, and the senior technicians fell into the obsolete category, which was probably worth getting rid of. When most of the people were gone, I decided to go over and introduce myself. After all, we were going to be working together, and it was better to know what to expect. "Sandra Wesley, Systems Integration Specialist," I introduced myself, extending my hand for a handshake. Trent shook my hand and gave me an appraising look. I watched as he quickly noted my age, my appearance, my decidedly informal way of dressing. There was no strict dress code at Data Flow Systems, and I preferred comfortable jeans and t-shirts to strict suits. "Sandra," he asked, "what exactly are you working on?" "I'm designing the integration architecture for a federal contract with the Department of Defense," I replied. "Oh, you are," he said, a new note in his voice. "Interesting. How long have you been with the company?" "A year and a half." "And you're the lead specialist on such an important project?" His question sounded surprised, not very polite. "Yes," I answered simply. "I see." Trent nodded, but the look on his face made it clear that he thought the situation was at least a little strange. "What's your experience with enterprise solutions?" The question was phrased as if he knew in advance that I didn't have enough experience and wanted to confirm it. "Enough to solve the tasks at hand," I answered, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Of course," Trent smiled, and I didn't like that smile. "I'm sure you're doing fine. I'm just curious how the company makes decisions about appointments to key positions." That's when Mike came up to us. "Trent, let me introduce myself as Mike Torres, Systems Administrator. And let me say right off the bat that Sandra is one of the most talented professionals I've ever had the pleasure of working with. The integration system she created for the Pentagon is a work of art." "That's very nice of you," Trent replied in a tone that made it clear that he thought Mike's opinion was biased. But you realize that in today's world, it's not just technical competence that's important, but also an understanding of business processes, strategic planning, and risk management. Sandra understands business processes very well, Mike objected. That's why her system works so well. Of course, Trent waved his hand. I'm not questioning her technical expertise. I just think that such important projects should be supervised by more experienced professionals. Experienced, he said, as if he meant grown men in suits, not young women in jeans. Do you have any experience with integration systems? I asked. I have project management experience in technology companies, he replied. And I know that the success of any project depends not only on technical implementation, but also on proper planning, resource allocation, and quality control. That's all great in theory, I said. But in our particular case, success depends on 17 different government systems being able to exchange data without violating security protocols. It's a purely technical challenge. Sandra, Trent smiled patronizingly, you're looking at the problem too narrowly. Any technical task is part of a broader business process, and that process needs to be optimized. I could feel the irritation starting to boil up inside me. This man had been with the company for exactly 0 days, had no idea about the specifics of our project, and yet he felt entitled to tell me how the system I had spent 8 months building should work. Listen, I said, trying to keep a polite tone. Maybe you could study the project from the inside first, and then we could talk about optimization? That's a great idea, Trent agreed. I plan to conduct a detailed audit of all current projects in the coming weeks. I think it will be very instructive. The way he said enlightening was threatening. It was clear that Trent had already made up his mind. A young employee being entrusted with an important project was the result of poor management planning that needed to be corrected. After that conversation, I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but my thoughts kept returning to the new vice president. My intuition told me that the arrival of Trent Covington did not bode well for me personally or for the project as a whole. My fears were confirmed a few days later when Trent began holding one-on-one meetings with department heads, reviewing project structures and, as he put it, identifying points of growth. I learned from my colleagues that these meetings were more like interrogations. Trent asked tricky questions about the need for certain positions, the efficiency of employees, and the possibilities of automating processes. He asked me directly if I could replace half of the testers with automated tools, Lisa told me during her lunch break. And when I tried to explain why manual testing was necessary for government projects, he wrote it down as resistance to innovation. He asked me why we had so many senior developers, David Morrison added. He said that young specialists work faster and cost less. I realized that sooner or later it would be my turn. So when Trent walked into my office towards the end of the day on Friday with a clipboard in his hands and a businesslike smile on his face, I was ready to talk. Sandra, do you have a few minutes? He asked. I'd like to discuss your project. Sure, I replied, pushing the keyboard away and turning to Trent. What exactly did you want to talk about? Trent settled into the chair across from my desk with the look of a man about to give an important educational talk. He opened his tablet and flipped through several screens, obviously studying some notes. I've done a preliminary analysis of the federal project, he began, and I have to say that I have some questions about the architecture and resource allocation. I'm listening, I said neutrally. First of all, I find it strange that such a large-scale project is overseen by only one specialist. Normal companies have at least 5 to 7 people on their systems integration teams. Dataflow Systems is not a normal company in a bad way, I argued. We specialize in solving non-standard problems with minimal resources. That's our competitive advantage. Maybe, Trent agreed in a tone that made it clear that he saw it as a disadvantage, not an advantage. But it creates critical failure points. What happens if you get sick? What happens if you decide to quit? I felt my muscles tense up. The question about my possible dismissal sounded not like a theoretical reflection, but a very practical consideration. The system is documented, I answered cautiously. Any qualified person can understand the architecture. Documented is good, Trent nodded, but documentation and experience are different things. It seems to me that we need to build a team of specialists who can replace each other when necessary. It sounded reasonable on the surface, but I sensed a catch. The project is in its final stages, I said. The system is 3 weeks away from being delivered to the Department of Defense. Now is not the time to be experimenting with team composition. It's exactly the right time, Trent argued. Once the project is delivered, we'll need to maintain the system, develop it, maybe scale it. We need a full team for that, not just one person holding all the knowledge in his head. He was right in the sense that long-term support of the system would indeed require a team. But I suspected that he wasn't so much interested in the quality of the support as in being able to replace an expensive specialist with a few cheap ones. Okay, I said. After the project is delivered, we can discuss expanding the team. But right now, any changes are risky. Sandra, Trent leaned back in his chair and looked at me with an expression of condescending patience. I understand that you're used to working alone and that you think you're indispensable. But this is an unhealthy situation for both you and the company. He said the word indispensable with emphasis, as if it were something shameful. I don't consider myself indispensable, I replied, trying to keep my tone even. I just know the specifics of the system better than anyone else. It's natural. I created it. That's exactly the problem, Trent leaned forward. The modern approach to development assumes that any team member can pick up the work of any other team member. It's called the bus factor. How many people have to get hit by the bus for the project to stop? I knew about the bus factor, but I also knew that in reality not all projects can be organized according to the principles of perfect teamwork, especially when it comes to complex legacy systems integration. Trent, I said, I understand the theory, but in practice, the integration of government systems requires a deep understanding of the specifics of each agency, their security protocols, and the peculiarities of document flow. This is knowledge that takes months to accumulate. That's why we need to start transferring knowledge now, he argued. I have several candidates who could join the project team. Candidates? I questioned. From where? I've reviewed the resumes of several specialists who have recently been released after projects at other companies were closed. They are young, energetic, no modern methodologies. I was suspicious that Trent was already considering specific candidates, even though we had just started discussing the possibility of expanding the team. Could I see their resumes? I asked. Sure. Trent flipped through the clipboard and turned it toward me. Here, for example, is Brad Stevenson. 3 years of experience in systems integration, worked on 2 major projects, knows modern frameworks. I ran my eyes over the resume. Brad did look like a competent professional, but his experience was mostly in commercial systems. Not a word about working with government contracts, security systems, or legacy integration. Did he have experience with federal systems? I asked. Experience is an acquired skill, Trent said. The main thing is the right approach and up-to-date knowledge. Trent, I tried to explain again, integrating with the Pentagon is not an ordinary system integration. You have to take into account many nuances that are not described in any textbook. Like what? He asked defiantly. For example, the Navy system uses a special authentication protocol that conflicts with Army system standards. To solve this problem, I created a middleware layer that translates requests from one format to another. But that layer has to be manually configured every time one of the agencies updates its protocols. I see, Trent nodded. How long does it take to explain these nuances to a new employee? Depends on their basic knowledge. If they have experience with government systems, a few weeks. If not, a few months. Months? Trent raised his eyebrows. Sandra, don't you think you're being dramatic? No, I don't, I replied firmly. I spent 8 months building this system, and most of that time was spent learning the specifics of each agency. 8 months is a long time for a project like this, Trent said. In modern companies, such tasks can be accomplished in 2 or 3 months. I felt my patience starting to wear thin. Modern companies don't integrate 17 different Pentagon systems with different levels of secrecy, I said, sharper than I'd intended. Sandra, Trent looked at me with an expression of frustration. I get the impression that you're not ready for a constructive discussion. You take any attempt at optimization as personal criticism. I perceive attempts to change a working system in the last weeks before the deadline as a threat to the project, I replied. Good. Trent closed the tablet. Let's hold off on expanding the team for now, but I want you to prepare detailed documentation on all aspects of the system. If something happens, we should be able to find a replacement quickly. There was an unmistakable threat in the way he said, if anything happens. It was clear that Trent had already made a decision about my future fate in the company. After he left, I sat staring at the computer screen for a long time, trying to concentrate on my work, but my thoughts kept returning to my conversation with Trent. It was obvious that the new vice president saw me as a problem that needed to be solved. An hour later, Mike came in to see me. He looked worried. Sandra, I just got off the phone with David Morrison. Trent called him into a meeting and bluntly told him that he plans to optimize the composition of the technical teams. What exactly did he mean by optimizing? I asked, although I had a rough idea of the answer. Cutting senior people and replacing them with junior people, Mike replied grimly. It had been hinted to David that at his age he should consider early retirement. David Morrison was 52 years old and one of the most experienced developers in the company. The idea that he might be laid off to save money seemed absurd. What did Robert say? I asked. He couldn't help but realize that David was critical to the company. David hasn't decided to talk to Robert directly yet, Mike said. He was afraid it would be perceived as a complaint against the boss's son. That was the main problem with the situation. Trent wasn't just the new vice president, he was the son of the company's owner. That made any criticism of his decisions extremely career risky. Mike, I said, do you think Robert is aware of Trent's plans? I don't know, Mike shrugged. Maybe Trent convinced him that modernization was necessary. Robert always trusted numbers, and Trent had probably prepared a presentation on how much money could be saved in salaries. We were silent for a moment, pondering the situation. By the way, Mike added, I heard that Trent has already conducted several interviews with external candidates. Word is that he plans to announce the reorganization early next week. That soon? I wondered. Apparently, he doesn't like to procrastinate. It's his style to make sweeping changes quickly. After Mike left, I tried to concentrate on work, but my concentration was broken. My mind was spinning with thoughts of possible scenarios. If Trent was really planning large-scale layoffs, I would probably be at the top of the list. A young employee with a relatively high salary who dared to object to the new management. Toward the end of the day, Lisa came up to me. She looked worried. Sandra, can I talk to you? She asked quietly. Sure, just not here. Lisa looked around. Let's go to the cafe on the first floor. We went down to a small cafe in the lobby of the building. Lisa ordered coffee but didn't touch it, nervously twirling the cup in her hands. Sandra, she began, I overheard Trent talking to someone on the phone today. He was talking about layoffs and mentioned your name. My heart sank, but I tried not to show it. What exactly did he say? That we need to get rid of problem employees who are resistant to change, and that a young girl who thinks she's indispensable on a federal project needs to realize who's boss. I see, I said quietly. Sandra, Lisa leaned closer. You need to talk to Robert. Explain to him what will happen if you get fired. Do you think he'll listen to me? I asked. Trent is his son. Robert's a pragmatist, Lisa countered. If you can prove that firing you jeopardizes your federal contract, he'll protect you. Maybe, I agreed, but I doubted it was that simple. Look, Lisa lowered her voice even more. I know it's not nice to speak ill of your superiors, but Trent is a disaster for the company. He has no idea what we do, and yet he wants to remake everything to Silicon Valley standards. What do the others say? I asked. Everyone understands what's going on, but they're afraid to speak out. You know how it is. No one wants to ruin relations with the new management. That's what worried me the most. Even if my colleagues understood the absurdity of what was happening, they were not going to risk their careers to protect others. Lisa, I said, If I get fired, will you be able to support the integration system? She shook her head. Sandra, I'm an analyst, not a systems architect. I understand the general principles, but I don't know the implementation details. And I don't have the appropriate access rights to federal systems. What about Mike? Mike is a systems administrator. He can keep the servers running, but he can't modify the integration logic. We talked some more, but it became clear that we had no real plan of action. Lisa was right about talking to Robert, but I doubted it would help. It was too obvious that Trent had been given carte blanche by his father to reform. That evening, back at home, I thought about the situation for a long time. Technically, I could try to find another job, but that would mean abandoning the project at a critical moment. The federal contract was not only important to data flow systems, it was important to me personally. It was my first really large-scale project, and its successful realization could open up serious career prospects. On the other hand, if Trent really planned to get rid of me, it would happen sooner or later. The only question was when exactly he would decide to take that step. Monday began with an email from Trent with the subject line, "Mandatory meeting, 10 a.m., Vice President's office." No details, no explanation, just a dry demand to show up at the appointed time. I had an inkling of what to expect, but I still spent the weekend stressing over possible scenarios for the conversation. I spent most of Sunday making sure that all critical project documentation was in the public domain. If the worst did happen, at least colleagues would be able to find key materials. Trent's office was located on the 32nd floor, a floor above the main work areas. It was symbolic. The new vice president immediately distanced himself from the rank and file, taking his position above them, literally. At 10 sharp, I knocked on his office door. Trent's voice gave me permission to enter, and I found myself in a spacious room with panoramic windows overlooking downtown Austin. Trent was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, a slim file in front of him. "Sandra, sit down," he said, not even looking up from the papers. I sat down in the chair across from the desk. Trent studied some documents for another minute, clearly creating psychological pressure, and then finally looked at me. "I called you in to discuss the changes in the structure of the project teams," he began in a businesslike tone. In a businesslike tone. "As I said last week, the company is moving toward more modern project management methodologies." "I'm listening," I replied neutrally. "A federal project is nearing completion, and we need to think about how we will organize its further support. I have decided to create a specialized team of 3 specialists who will be in charge of system maintenance." "I see," I said. "And what will be my role in this team?" Trent was silent for a few seconds, looking me straight in the eye. "Unfortunately, your position was redundant," he said in a flat tone. "The new team will work under the guidance of a more experienced team leader, and the current tasks can be distributed among the rest of the team." The word redundant hit like a slap in the face. I'd built a system from scratch, spent 8 months solving unique technical problems, and now I was being told my work was redundant. "Trent," I said, trying to remain calm, "do you realize the system isn't complete? We're 2.5 weeks away from the deadline, and there are several critical modules that need to be finalized." "That's why I made the decision to reorganize," he replied. "You can't have a situation where the fate of such an important project depends on one person." "But that's exactly what you're doing," I objected. "You're firing the only person who fully understands the architecture of the system 2 weeks before the project is due." "Sandra," Trent shook his head with an expression of condescending patience, "you overestimate your importance. Yes, you know the system well, but that doesn't mean no one else can maintain it." "And who exactly is going to maintain it?" I asked. "The Brad Stevenson you mentioned last week?" "Brad is one of the candidates," Trent confirmed. "I'm also considering several other specialists. All of them have up-to-date training and experience with enterprise systems." "Experience with commercial systems," I corrected him. "None of them have worked on federal projects." "Sandra," Trent sounded annoyed, "you're acting like a kid who doesn't want to share his toys. There's no unique knowledge that can't be passed on or recovered." That phrase finally got to me. Toys. 8 months of hard work, Hundreds of hours of debugging, dozens of solved problems that could have buried the entire project. He called them toys. Okay, I said quietly. When does my termination take effect? Today is your last day of work, Trent answered. HR will prepare all the necessary documents. You'll need to hand over your system passwords and turn in your corporate equipment. Today? I couldn't believe it. Are you serious? The sooner the transition begins, the better for everyone, Trent shrugged. Delaying it would only make it more difficult. I sat there, trying to comprehend what was happening. I was being fired immediately, without warning, 2 weeks before the most important project in the company's history. And it was being done by someone who had no idea how the system I had worked on for over 6 months worked. Do you have any questions? Trent asked, looking at his watch. Just one, I answered. Is Robert aware of this decision? For the first time in the whole conversation, Trent looked a little uncertain. My father has given me full authority to optimize the staff, he said. I'm sure he will support my decision. In the way he answered the question without answering it, I realized that Robert didn't know about my dismissal. Trent had made the decision on his own and planned to confront my father with the fact. I see, I said and stood up. I'll go pack my things then. Sandra, Trent stood up as well. I know it may seem unfair right now, but believe me, this decision is in the best interest of the company. You're young, talented, you'll find a new position in no time. Those words were supposed to sound like comfort, but they sounded like mockery. Trent was ruining my career while trying to look like a caring mentor. I walked out of his office without a word. As I walked down to my floor, I felt a strange emptiness inside. Not anger, not despair, just a complete emptiness, as if all the air had been sucked out of me. My desk looked exactly the same as it had on Friday night. 3 monitors with open windows of the monitoring system, a stack of technical documentation, a mug with the remains of my morning coffee. I sat down in my chair and just stared at the screens for a few minutes. The system was working steadily, all the indicators green. In 2 weeks, that stability would turn into chaos, but right now, everything looked perfect. The first thing I did was lock down my personal accesses to critical modules. Technically, it was a violation of the rules. A departing employee had to hand over all passwords to security. But I wasn't about to make life any easier for the person who had just called my job toys. Then I started packing up my personal belongings. In a year and a half, surprisingly little personal stuff had accumulated. A few programming books, a spare mug, a small cactus that Lisa had given me for my birthday. It all fit into one small box. Colleagues began to pull up to the process of packing. Lisa was the first to arrive, her face anxious. Sandra, she whispered, is it true? Did you really get fired? Yes, I answered, not taking my eyes off the packing of books. Today is my last day. But how? Why? Lisa looked at me confused. After all, there are 2 weeks left before the project is due. Trent thinks that my position is redundant, I said with a bitter smile. He plans to create a team of 3 specialists to support the system. A team of 3 specialists? Lisa interrogated. And who will lead it? Not me, I shrugged. Mike joined us. He looked shocked. Sandra, I just heard from David, he said. This is a nightmare. How can you fire a key person 2 weeks before the deadline? It's very simple, I replied. You walk into the vice president's office. He says you're redundant, and that's it. What did Robert say? Mike asked. Robert doesn't know yet, I admitted. Trent made the decision on his own. Mike and Lisa looked at each other. Sandra, Mike said cautiously, maybe we should talk to Robert directly. Explain the situation to him. I thought about that suggestion. Theoretically, Robert could override his son's decision. He understood the importance of the federal project and knew my role in its realization. But on the other hand, Trent wasn't just a vice president, he was the boss's son. Robert wouldn't publicly overrule his son's decisions, even if he thought they were wrong. No, I said finally. I shouldn't. If Trent wants to experiment with human resources, let him. It's his responsibility now. But the system, Lisa started. The system is documented, I interrupted. At least the basic principles. Trent and his team would figure out the rest. We all realized that wasn't true. The documentation reflected the overall architecture, but it couldn't describe the hundreds of little nuances, crutches, and workarounds we had to use when working with the various federal systems. This knowledge existed only in my head. The next 2 hours were spent trying to formally hand off the project. I prepared a brief briefing on the basic modules of the system, a list of critical dependencies, and a list of contacts at various agencies. All of this was uploaded into a shared project folder and emailed to Trent. In the email, I wrote just a few lines. Trent, attached is the basic documentation for the federal project. Personal access to systems will be shared with security in accordance with corporate procedures. The reply came 10 minutes later. Thank you for your promptness. Best of luck in your future career. Even in email correspondence, Trent managed to sound patronizing. By lunchtime, the news of my termination had spread across the floor. Colleagues approached, expressing sympathy, inquiring about my plans. Most genuinely didn't understand the logic behind Trent's decision. Some openly said it was crazy. David Morrison, who himself was in danger of being fired, approached me just before lunch. Sandra, he said quietly, I wanted to apologize. For what? I wondered. For not standing up for you. For being silent when things like this happen. David, I shook my head. It's not your fault. Everyone has their own life, their own family. No one has to risk their career for their co-workers. Maybe, he agreed. But I still don't like feeling like a coward. You're not a coward, I countered. You're a realist. After lunch, I took the box of personal belongings to my car and then returned to officially turn in the corporate equipment. The procedure took half an hour. I had to return my laptop, phone, pass, and parking card. The HR employee processing my termination looked uncomfortable. Apparently, she didn't understand the logic behind Trent's decision either. Sandra, she said when we were done with the paperwork, I'm sorry about what happened. It happens, I replied. It's the job. If you need any letters of recommendation or references, feel free to call me anytime. Thank you. At 5 in the evening, I walked the floor for the last time, saying goodbye to my colleagues. Many promised to keep in touch, to help me find a new job. I thanked them all, but realized that most of those promises would remain words. Mike walked me to the elevator. Sandra, he said, I still can't believe this is happening. Just an hour ago, you were the key person on a major project, and now I'm unemployed. I finished for him. Life is full of surprises. This isn't a surprise, Mike countered. It's a disaster. And when the system collapses, Trent will try to blame it on anyone but himself. That's not my problem anymore, I said, though deep down I knew he was right. The elevator arrived. We said goodbye and I went down the hall. A security guard stopped me on the way out, standard procedure when I was fired. He checked that I had no corporate assets and wished me good luck. As I exited the building, I stopped on the sidewalk and turned around. The 30-story glass tower of data flow systems towered over downtown Austin, reflecting the setting sun. Back in the morning, this building had been my workplace. Now it had become a part of the past. I woke up Tuesday morning without an alarm clock, for the first time in a year and a half. It was strange to realize that I had nowhere to rush, no one waiting for me at the office, and no urgent tasks that needed immediate attention. This freedom should have been gratifying, but instead, it left me feeling empty. Over a cup of coffee, I tried to plan my day. I needed to update my resume, look for open positions in the systems integration field, and contact a few recruiters I'd spoken to in the past. The usual job search routine, which I hadn't done in a year and a half. The first call came in at 10:30 in the morning. It was Lisa, and I could tell by the tone of her voice that something was wrong. Sandra, she said excitedly, we're having problems with the integration system. What kind of problems? I asked, instinctively tensing up. The fleet databases stopped synchronizing with the central repository. The errors started around 8 this morning, and Mike can't figure out what's wrong. I mentally mulled over the possible causes of the glitch. Most likely, the problem was related to the timestamp conversion module that I was finalizing on Friday. The system might have automatically updated some components over the weekend, causing a version conflict. Who is in charge of system support now? I asked. Technically, it's Mike, but he says he doesn't know how the integration modules work, Lisa replied. Trent tried to contact Brad Stevenson, but he said he couldn't get here until tomorrow. Tomorrow? I couldn't believe it. What about what to do with the system today? Exactly, Lisa sounded desperate. Sandra, I understand that you were fired, but maybe you can give at least a consultation? At least tell me what direction to dig in. I sat silently with the phone to my ear, contemplating the situation. On the one hand, I no longer had any obligations to data flow systems. I'd been fired, declaring the position redundant, so let them handle it themselves. On the other hand, the federal contract was my baby, and watching it fall apart because of someone else's stupidity was painful. Lisa, I finally said, I'm no longer with the company. I have no access to the systems, no official authority. If I give the wrong advice, who will be held responsible? But you know the system better than anyone. I did, I corrected. Yesterday I did. Today I'm an unemployed person looking for a new job. Lisa was silent for a few seconds. I see, she said quietly. I'm sorry to disturb you. It's okay, I replied. Keep me posted on how things are going. After that call, I sat there for a long time staring out the window and thinking. Logically, I'd done the right thing. Why help the people who'd kicked me out? But emotionally, it was hard to know that a project I had put so much effort into could fail because of such a stupid situation. An hour later, Mike called. He sounded even more agitated than Lisa. Sandra, he began without preamble, there's total chaos going on. The Navy systems are completely disconnected from integration, the Army databases are giving authentication errors, and the monitoring system shows that half the modules are not responding. What's Trent doing? I asked. Trent is running around the office like a madman and demanding that everything be fixed immediately, Mike said grimly. He called an emergency meeting for 11 in the morning. What are you going to tell him? Honestly, I have no idea, Mike admitted. I can reboot servers, check network connections, update logs. But the logic of the integration modules is a bit of a mystery to me. I sighed. The situation was unfolding exactly as I'd envisioned. Mike, I said, I realize you're in a difficult situation, but I am officially no longer involved with the project. Sandra, please, Mike's voice was pleading. At least tell me where to look for the problem. I'm not asking you to fix the system, just point me in the right direction. I hesitated. Helping Mike meant indirectly helping Trent, who'd fired me, but to refuse meant setting up a coworker who wasn't to blame for the situation. Okay, I said finally. Check the timestamp conversion module for the fleet systems. Most likely the problem is there. And check the logs of the integration API for the last 2 days. It should indicate what exactly is in conflict. Thank you, Mike exhaled with relief. You're a lifesaver. Don't thank me before the time, I warned. It could be just the beginning of trouble. Turns out I was right. 2 hours later, Mike called again. Sandra, he said in a tired voice, I found a problem with the timestamps. You were right. There really is a version conflict there, but when I tried to fix it, the Army systems crashed. What exactly is happening to the Army systems? They can't authenticate with the central hub. They're getting an invalid security certificate error. I closed my eyes, visualizing the architecture of the system. There was more to the problem than met the eye. The Army systems used cascading authentication, which depended on the Navy module working correctly. By fixing one problem, Mike set off a chain reaction. Mike, I said, you need to roll back the changes to the timestamp module and then fix the problem another way. Otherwise, the whole authentication system is going to fail. What's the other way to fix it? That's, hard to explain over the phone, I admitted. You have to change the logic between 3 different modules. Mike was silent. Sandra, he said finally, what if you came over? Just for a little while, just to look at the system? Mike, I've been fired. I can't just come into the office. What if I said you forgot something important? He suggested. Like personal documents or something? I thought about it. Technically, I did have a few things left in the office. A spare mug in the break room, some tech magazines on a shelf. Nothing important, but an excuse to come over. "I'll think about it," I said. "Sandra, please," Mike insisted. "We can't do this without you, and the deadline is less than 2 weeks away." After talking to Mike, I thought about the situation for another half an hour. Logically, it didn't make sense to help my former coworkers. Emotionally, it was hard to say no. In the end, curiosity won out. I wanted to see with my own eyes what the system had become in just 1 day without my supervision. At 2:30 in the afternoon, I arrived at the data flow systems office. The same girl as always sat at the front desk, but as I approached the turnstiles, she stopped me. I'm sorry," she said politely, "but your pass is blocked." "I know," I replied. "I was fired yesterday, but I left my personal belongings in the office and would like to retrieve them." The girl frowned, obviously not knowing what to do in such a situation. "Please wait," she said, and called the security service. 5 minutes later, the security guard who had escorted me out of the office yesterday came down. He recognized me and nodded. "What did you forget?" he asked. "A mug and some magazines," I replied. "Okay, I'll walk you out. Make it quick, okay?" We went up to the 30th floor. The atmosphere in the office was tense, with people talking nervously, phone calls ringing and raised voices coming from the conference rooms. Mike saw me as soon as the elevator opened. "Sandra!" he cheered. "You're here." "I'm here to pick up some forgotten items," I said clearly, looking at the guard. "But I can take a look at the system monitoring." Mike took the hint and led me to his workplace, where a large monitor displayed the status of all the integration modules. The picture was depressing. More than half of the indicators were burning red or yellow. "This is what came out after my attempts to fix the timestamps," Mike pointed to the screen. "I rolled back the changes like you said, but the system is still unstable. I quickly analyzed the error logs. The problem was more serious than I thought. Attempting to patch a single module had actually started a cascade of failures in related systems. Now, it wasn't just a matter of rolling back the changes, it was a matter of completely rebuilding the module initialization sequence." "Mike," I said quietly, "this is not a quick fix. We have to rewrite the startup logic for half the system." "How long will that take?" 3 or 4 hours for me. For someone who doesn't know the architecture, 3 days if you're lucky." Mike's pale. "What happens if it's not fixed by tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, the Department of Defense will do a preliminary test of the system," I replied. "If the system doesn't work, the contract is in jeopardy." At that moment, loud voices came from the conference room on the 32nd floor. Someone was yelling so hard that the words could be heard even through the closed doors and the floor between us. "What's going on in there?" I asked. "Robert found out about your firing," Mike answered grimly. "He's talking to Trent right now." Talking was an understatement. Just then, the elevator opened, and out stepped a disheveled and red as cancer Robert Covington. He was followed by a pale Trent, who looked like he'd just been through a natural disaster. Robert saw me and stopped abruptly. "Sandra?" he asked. "What are you doing here?" "I'm picking up my personal belongings," I answered. "I'm looking at the status of the system." Robert's face contorted with rage, and he turned to his son. "Do you see it?" he asked Trent angrily. "Do you see what's happening? The system is collapsing, and the only man who can fix it comes here as a guest." "Father," Trent tried to intervene, "we'll find a solution." "What solution?" Robert raised his voice. "What have you done? Do you even know who you fired?" Trent tried to answer, but Robert didn't let him say a word. "Now our company is doomed to collapse," Robert continued to shout. $113 million contract is going down the drain because of your brilliant management decisions." The entire floor fell silent. All the employees pretended to be doing their work, but in fact they were listening intently to the management scandal. "Father, calm down," Trent whispered, looking back at the frozen employees. "We shouldn't be discussing this in front of everyone." "We shouldn't," Robert laughed sarcastically. "Was it worth it to fire key people 2 weeks before the deadline?" I felt extremely uncomfortable being at the center of a family conflict. The security guard who was escorting me also looked confused. "Robert," I said cautiously, "maybe you should discuss this privately." Robert looked at me, and the fury in his eyes was replaced by weariness. "Sandra," he said more quietly, "I'm sorry you witnessed this circus, but maybe you can explain to my son what he's done." I glanced at Trent. Yesterday he looked confident and smug, but now he looked like a schoolboy who'd been caught up in a serious prank. "I think what's important now is not who's right, but how to fix the situation," I said diplomatically. "Exactly," Robert agreed. "How to fix it? Do you have any ideas?" I looked at the monitoring screen, then at Mike, then at the guard, who obviously wanted to end this awkward situation as soon as possible. "Robert," I finally said, "I'm no longer with the company. It was explained to me yesterday that my position is redundant." Robert looked at his son again with an expression that made him cringe. "Sandra," Robert said, "I'm prepared to correct that mistake. Come back, please, state your terms." I thought about it. The offer was tempting, especially since the search for a new job might take longer. But the situation was too complicated to make any quick decisions. "I need time to think about it," I said. "This is a big decision." "We don't have time," Robert objected. "We have less than 24 hours to test the system." "Then you'll have to do it on your own," I said. "I'll get my things and go home." I quickly collected the forgotten mug from the break room and the magazines from the shelf. The security guard walked me to the exit, apologizing several times on the way for the awkward situation. As I drove out of the parking lot, I could see in my rearview mirror Robert and Trent continuing their conversation near the entrance to the building. It was clear from their gestures that the conversation was still far from over. At home, I sat down with my tea and tried to sort out my own feelings. On the one hand, it felt good to see Robert reprimanding his son for a stupid decision. On the other hand, it was painful to see how the project I had invested so much effort in was falling apart. But most importantly, I realized that I had power. The power to decide the fate of the federal contract, the power to influence the future of data flow systems, the power to make Trent accountable for his decisions. All that remained was to decide how to use that power. Thursday began when my phone started ringing at 7 in the morning. The first caller was Mike, who sounded panicked. "Sandra," he said without preamble, "the system is dead. Completely. All the integration modules have failed simultaneously. The central hub isn't responding. The federal databases can't see each other." I sat up in bed, instantly awake. "What exactly happened?" "I don't know," Mike admitted. "Last night I tried to fix the authentication problems you'd identified. I followed your recommendations, but something went wrong. I came in this morning and the system was in a coma." "Mike," I said gently, "you realize I'm no longer—" "Sandra, please," he interrupted. "I know you don't owe us anything, but tomorrow is the pre-test with the Department of Defense. If the system doesn't work—" He didn't finish, but we both knew the consequences. Failure of the test meant termination of the contract, financial loss, reputational damage to the entire company. "Mike," I said, "yesterday I was offered to come back on any terms. I said I'd think about it." "And what did you decide?" "Honestly, I haven't decided yet." During the night, I thought a lot about Robert's offer. On the one hand, coming back would mean recognition of my value and a chance to finish the project I'd put so much effort into. On the other hand, it was humiliating to work under Trent, who had humiliated me and kicked me out. "I'm still thinking about it," I replied. "Sandra, there's no time," Mike insisted. "Brad Stevenson came in yesterday, looked at the system, and said he needs at least a week to figure out the architecture. We don't have a week." After talking to Mike, I got up, brewed some coffee, and tried to sort out my own feelings. Logically, I knew that data flow systems needed my help. Emotionally, I didn't want to save the people who had betrayed me. At 8:30, Lisa called. "Sandra," she said excitedly, "did you hear what's going on? Mike told me. The system has completely failed." "There's some kind of panic," Lisa continued. "Trent's running around the office yelling at everyone. Brad Stevenson has locked himself in the conference room and is frantically studying something. Roberts called an emergency meeting for 9 a.m. What's the word on my possible return? Roberts announced to everyone that you can come back if you want to, but it remains to be seen if you will. We talked for a few more minutes, and Lisa asked me to seriously consider coming back. Sandra, she said, I understand that you've been hurt, but the whole team will suffer because of it. People could lose their jobs if the contract fell through. It was a painful subject. I really didn't want my coworkers to suffer because of Trent's stupidity, but at the same time, coming back would mean I was willing to forget the humiliation for the greater good. At 8:30, the call came from Robert himself. Sandra, he said without preamble, I need your answer. The system is down with less than 24 hours to test. Robert, I understand the complexity of the situation. Name your terms, he interrupted. Anything. Salary, position, authority, everything is negotiable. I thought about it. The opportunity to dictate terms was tempting. I want Trent fired, I said, and a public apology for the way I'd been treated. Robert was silent for a few seconds. Sandra, he said finally, firing Trent is going to be difficult. He's my son. Then how can I be sure the situation won't happen again in a month or two? I guarantee that Trent won't interfere with your work anymore. I'm not satisfied with lip service, I replied. Either he leaves or I don't come back. Give me time to think, Robert asked. You have until lunchtime, I said. After lunch might be too late. At 9 in the morning, Trent called. His voice didn't sound as confident as it had 3 days before. Sandra, he began, I want to apologize for what happened on Monday. I may have been hasty in my decision to terminate my employment. Perhaps, I noted to myself. Even as he apologized, he couldn't admit he'd made a mistake. Trent, I said, you called my work toys and me a child who doesn't want to share. That's not rash. That's disrespectful. I was wrong, he admitted. But the important thing now is to save the project. You realize we can't do it without your help, right? I do, I agreed. The question is whether you are ready to take responsibility for your decisions. What do you mean? In the sense that your decision to quit could ruin the whole project. And if that happens, it's your responsibility. Trent was silent. Sandra, he finally said, we can discuss my mistake later. What's important now is to keep the contract. For you, maybe, I replied. For me, not necessarily. At 10 in the morning, I got a call from David Morrison. Sandra, he said in a tired voice, I know you have no reason to help us, but think about the team, about the people who worked on this project with you. David, I replied, where was that team when I was fired? Who stood up for me? Who said it was wrong? We all knew it was wrong, he admitted, but no one dared to confront the boss's son. Exactly, I said. When it was necessary to be principled, everyone kept quiet, and now that the project was in jeopardy, everyone was talking about the team. You're right, David agreed. We acted like cowards. But are you really ready to bury the project because of our cowardice? That question hit the mark. I really didn't want to ruin the project because of a personal grudge, but at the same time, I couldn't just forget the humiliation. At 12:30, while I was still pondering the situation, a call from an unfamiliar number rang. Ms. Wesley? An unfamiliar male voice with a slight Texas accent asked. Yes, it's me. Colonel James Hansen, Information Technology Division, Department of Defense. I have a proposition for you. I was alerted. A call from a Pentagon spokesman was unexpected. Go ahead, Colonel. Ms. Wesley, we're monitoring the situation with the Data Flow Systems Integration System. We are aware of the problems that have arisen since your termination. I see, I said cautiously. Ms. Wesley, the Colonel continued, we've reviewed the project's technical documentation and your resume. I must say we're impressed with the quality of your work. Thank you. I have a suggestion, Colonel Henson said. The Department of Defense is interested in establishing direct working contact with you, not through data flow systems, but directly as an independent consultant. My heart beat faster. The offer to work directly with the Pentagon was a dream come true for any systems integrator. What about the contract with data flow systems? I asked. The contract with data flow systems will be terminated this afternoon, the Colonel replied calmly. They were unable to fulfill their commitment to deliver a working system on time. I felt the whole situation change dramatically. If the Department of Defense terminates the contract with Data Flow Systems and offers me to work directly, then all negotiations for a return are meaningless. "Colonel," I said, "and what terms of cooperation do you offer?" "Independent contractor status with the right to form my own team," he replied. "Work on several integration projects simultaneously. Salary and benefits on the level of senior technical consultants of the Pentagon." The terms were fantastic. Far better than anything Data Flow Systems had to offer, even with Robert's carte blanche. "I need time to think about it," I said, though I knew the answer in my heart. "Sure," the colonel agreed. "But I want to warn you that the official termination of the contract with Data Flow Systems will be announced at 14:00. After that, we'll have a window to start a new project." "I understand." "Good. I look forward to hearing from you by 13:30. After my conversation with Colonel Henson, I sat on the phone for a long time, thinking about what had happened. The Ministry of Defense offered me a dream job, direct cooperation with the customer, interesting projects, excellent conditions, and all this as a consequence of the situation with the dismissal. At 1:30, Robert called. "Sandra," he said, "I've made a decision. Trent is suspended from all projects for 6 months. You get full autonomy in matters of technical realization." "Robert," I replied, "thank you for the offer, but the situation has changed." "What do you mean?" "I've received another offer, a more interesting one." "From whom?" Robert sounded worried. "The Department of Defense, directly." Robert was silent for a few seconds. "Sandra," he said finally, "you do realize that if you refuse to help us, the contract will be terminated, right?" "I do," I said, "and that's not my problem. But we can offer you more than the Pentagon." "Robert," I interrupted, "the Pentagon offers me something you don't have." "What's that?" "Respect," I replied. "They see me as a valuable asset, not a problem to be solved." At 2:00 in the afternoon, a Defense Department official sent out a notice of termination of the contract with Data Flow Systems for failure to meet technical requirements. A copy of the letter arrived in my email as well, apparently as the technical consultant for the project. 15 minutes after the official notification, I received another call from Colonel Henson. "Ms. Wesley," he said, "do you have a response to our proposal?" "Yes, Colonel," I replied. "I accept your offer." "Good. We'll expect you at our office tomorrow morning at 10 to discuss the details. I'll email you the address. I'll be there." After talking to the colonel, I turned off my phone. During 2 hours, it rang dozens more times. Mike, Lisa, Robert, even Trent called. But I didn't feel like talking to the Data Flow Systems people anymore. In the evening, I turned on the news. The economic summary mentioned that a major Texas IT company had lost a $113 million federal contract because of technical problems. Data Flow Systems wasn't named, but it was understandable for the industry. I sat down with a glass of wine and thought about how dramatically my life had changed in 4 days. On Monday morning, I was an ordinary employee of an IT company. Thursday night, I was an independent consultant for the U.S. Department of Defense. Trent wanted to get rid of the problem employee. Instead, he created a dream career for me and buried a $113 million project. Sometimes justice does prevail, just not always in the way you expect. The Department of Defense office in Austin was located in an unremarkable gray stone building 20 minutes from downtown. No signage, no directional signs, just a house number and a strict security check at the entrance. I got there Friday morning at 10 sharp, feeling a mixture of excitement and unreality. Colonel James Henson turned out to be a man in his 50s with graying temples and penetrating gray eyes. He met me in the lobby and escorted me to a small conference room where 2 other people were waiting, a woman in a major's uniform and a civilian in an austere suit. "Miss Wesley," the colonel said as we sat down, "let me introduce Major Susan Clark, the cybersecurity officer in charge of integration projects, and Daniel Green, our senior technical advisor." We exchanged handshakes, and the colonel opened a thin folder of documents. "Before we discuss the details of the partnership," he began, I want to make sure you understand the specifics of working with the Department of Defense. This is not a private company where you can experiment with approaches. It's about reliability, safety, and strict adherence to protocols. I understand, I replied. That's why the integration system for data flow systems was built with security in mind. Yes, we have reviewed your work, Daniel Green confirmed. I have to say that the architecture is impressive, especially the solution to the problem of interoperability between systems of different branches of the military. Thank you, I said, feeling a warm sense of recognition blossom inside me. It's been a long time since I've heard a professional assessment of my work without reservation or condescension. We have several projects that require that kind of expertise, Major Clark continued. Integration of Air Force systems with unified command, modernization of data exchange protocols between bases on the East and West coasts, creation of a unified monitoring system for cybersecurity. With each project named, my interest grew. These were tasks of a completely different scale and complexity than anything I had ever had to work with before. Being an independent contractor gives you a lot of freedom in the way you work, Colonel Henson explained. You can form your own team, choose your own technology, set up your own work processes. The only requirement is that the result must meet our standards for safety and reliability. And what is the time frame for the first project? I asked. 6 months to integrate the Air Force systems, Daniel replied. But that's assuming you have an experienced team. We discussed the details of the contract, the payment terms, the security requirements. Everything was much more serious and professional than at data flow systems. Here I was, treated as an expert whose opinion carries weight. By the end of the meeting, I had signed a preliminary cooperation agreement. The formalization was to be completed within a week, and I could start working on my first project on Monday. Walking out of the Ministry of Defense building, I felt completely different from the week before. Then I was a laid-off employee with an uncertain future. Now I was an independent consultant for one of the most prestigious organizations in the country. Over the weekend, I received dozens of missed calls and messages from former colleagues at data flow systems. I didn't answer a single one. Other people's problems were no longer my problems. On Monday morning, on my way to my new office, I turned on the radio and heard a news item that made me smile. The announcer was reporting that Data Flow Systems, a Texas-based IT company, had announced major layoffs after losing a federal contract. According to unofficial reports, the company could lose as many as 40% of its employees. On Wednesday, a courier arrived at my home address with a letter from Robert Covington. The letter was handwritten on expensive paper with the company logo. Dear Sandra, the letter began. I realize you have no reason to read this letter, but please spare a few minutes. The loss of the federal contract has been a disaster for data flow systems. We've had to lay off 42 employees, close 3 projects, and give up the lease on half of our office space. Trent has been removed from all management functions and is considering leaving the company. I want you to know that his decision to resign was made without my knowledge or approval. If I had known in advance, this never would have happened. Sandra, I'm not asking you to come back. I realize the bridges are burned, but if you ever want to give us a second chance, my door is always open. Respectfully and regretfully, Robert Covington. I read the letter twice, folded it, and tossed it in the trash. Some opportunities are given only once. A month into my new position, I received a message from Lisa. She found my LinkedIn profile and wrote a short message. Sandra, saw your new job. Congratulations. Well deserved. Things are bad here. Half the team has been laid off, projects are being shut down. Mike left for another company. David took early retirement. Trent's no longer with the company. I hope you're doing well. I read the message and didn't respond. Lisa was a good person, but belonged to a past I preferred not to remember. By the end of my second month with the Department of Defense, I was already managing a team of 5 specialists and overseeing 3 different projects at the same time. My status in the industry had changed dramatically. Recruiters were now calling me every week with offers, and at professional conferences I was approached by colleagues who wanted to discuss their experience working with federal systems. At one such conference, which was held in Dallas, I happened to meet Mike Torres. He was working as a systems administrator for a small consulting firm and looked visibly aged. "Sandra!" He was happy to see me. "How are you? I hear you're working with the Pentagon now." "Yes," I confirmed. "How about you? Did you get a job after Dataflow?" "I got a job," Mike nodded, "but it's a completely different job. Routine support of corporate systems, no interesting projects." We talked a bit about current affairs, and Mike couldn't help but bring up the subject of our former company. "You know," he said, lowering his voice, "after you left, things fell apart very quickly. The loss of the federal contract set off a chain reaction. Customers began to question the company's credibility, and some canceled existing contracts. Robert tried to stay in business, but the reputational damage was too severe." "What happened to Trent?" I asked out of curiosity. "He was suspended from all projects a week after the federal contract was canceled," Mike replied. "A month later, he tendered his resignation. They say he's trying to launch his own startup in Silicon Valley." I nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor sympathy. Trent had gotten the consequences of his decisions, nothing more. "Sandra," Mike said after a moment's silence, "I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For not standing up for you back then. For keeping silent when this injustice was happening." "Mike," I said, "it wasn't your fault. Everyone had their own situation, their own family, their own obligations." "Maybe," he agreed. "But it's still unpleasant to remember." "Don't remember," I advised. "You can't change the past, and there's no use regretting it." We said goodbye, and I never saw him again. After 6 months of working with the Ministry of Defense, I was asked to head a new division for the integration of critical systems. This meant even more responsibility, its own budget, and the opportunity to influence strategic cybersecurity decisions. The day I signed the new contract, I received a LinkedIn notification that Dataflow Systems had declared bankruptcy. The company, once one of the leaders in the Texas IT market, was ceasing to exist after 20 years in business. I read the news without much emotion. Dataflow Systems was an important part of my life, but only a part. Real life began after I left there. That evening, sitting in my new office on the 38th floor of the Federal Building, I stared out the window at the lights of Austin and thought about how fate works in bizarre ways. Trent wanted to get rid of a problem employee and streamline work processes. Instead, he destroyed my father's company and opened the door to a career I never dreamed of. During my 2 years as an independent consultant, I managed over $500 million worth of projects, created integration systems for 3 branches of the military, and received a Department of Defense award for outstanding contributions to cybersecurity. No one from Dataflow Systems ever tried to contact me again. Bridges had been burned permanently, and I had no regrets. Sometimes the best thing that can happen in a career is when you get fired from a job that doesn't appreciate you, because that's the only time you realize what you're really capable of. Trent thought he held my fate in his hands. In reality, he just opened the door to a future that was much brighter than the past. And the best part of it all is that there is justice. Sometimes it just doesn't come in the form you expect it to. Thank you to everyone who listened to this story to the end. You are true heroes of patience. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because I have many more stories like this about how underappreciated employees turn the game around. And be sure to tell me in the comments, have you faced similar situations at work? Maybe you too have been underestimated by a self-sabotaging boss. Or on the contrary, have you seen colleagues get what they deserved for their incompetence? Share your stories. Sometimes real life is cooler than any scenario. And for those who are going through similar struggles at work right now, remember that every closure can be the start of something much better. See you in the next issues, where justice will once again be served in the most unexpected ways.